The current level of educational funding can be calculated in different ways. But if you're looking at basic school aid, that amount of funding has been reduced over time. Starting back at about the 2008 level, it has been reduced annually. In your opinion, is the current level of funding for schools adequate? Explain your view and specify how you would or would not change current funding levels.
Well, I don't think the current funding levels are adequate. I don't think we ought to be funding the schools in 2012 at a level that, in inflation-adjusted dollars, approximately what we were spending in the late 90s. And that's what, in fact, has happened in Kansas. I think as the economy fell off a cliff in 2008, 2009, and 2010, it may have made sense to cut some parts of the budget in order to account for that. But now that the state's economy is recovering and revenues were improving, the first order of business of the legislature and for the governor should have been to bring the school formula up to full funding. And instead of doing that, the legislature and the governor have now ensured that there won't be adequate funding to fully fund the formula. When I'm in Topeka, my first order of business is going to be to do everything I can to try to restore adequate funding at the state level so that the base amount for education can be brought up to the statutory level, at least up to the statutory level. And going forward, it can be it can keep pace with inflation. But I don't think the current level is adequate. And I don't think anybody else is likely to think so either.
Okay, Mr. Russell, could you also respond to that question regarding the level of funding for education and explain your view?
Sure, Mike is certainly correct about my answer. It is absolutely inadequate. There were independent studies done during the last round of school litigation in the mid-2000s that showed it costs, on average, about $4,400 to $4,500 per student to provide a suitable education in Kansas-based state aid. And the legislature funded it at close to that level for a couple of years, and then, like Mike said, the bottom dropped out and the recession hit. This year, with the economy recovering some, they had the money to fully restore the funding to that level. Now, I'd like it to be higher because of inflation since that time. That at a bare minimum, the constitutional and statutory responsibility of the legislature and the governor is to fund the schools at that level, that suitable level under the Constitution. The governor and the legislature chose not to do that this year. They chose to restore $58 per student, which in my opinion is like throwing crumbs to a starving person and wanting a standing ovation. They should not be congratulated for that $58. They should be ashamed of it. And they should be ashamed of what they did instead of restoring the rest of the funding. They had the money in the bank to fully restore the funding back to the 2008 levels and made a choice not to do that. The governor says, don't worry, we'll still fund the schools. But just because he says it, again, are you noticing a pattern here? Just because he says it doesn't make it true. You can't fund the schools without the money.
Lisa, your response to the same question.
I absolutely agree with what my two colleagues have just said. It's very clear that schools are extremely underfunded right now. And when you look at the basic aid that we're seeing for this current year as well as the last year, you have to go back to, I think it's the year 2000 to get to a dollar amount that is that low, just on non-inflation adjusted dollars. And actually, I'm going to disagree a little bit with what Mike said, because based on the information I have from the Kansas Department of Education, I think the inflation adjustment is even back further than the late 90s. I think it's prior to 1992, because 1992 dollars adjusted for inflation are more than our funding is today. So we clearly have a problem, and it saddens me because people do not realize that not only is education important for the future of our young people, our communities, and our states, but it is one of the primary economic engines of our communities. It's what attracts residents, it's what attracts business, and when we undermine our public education system, we are hurting ourselves across the board. Now, teachers and administrators have valiantly gotten along with less and less, and I think that they've done miraculous things. But sadly, many of you may have seen that recently our student test scores in the state dropped for the first time in 11 years. And the cost of these cuts are catching up with us, and we need to reverse course, and we must fully and adequately fund public education.
Thank you, Merlin.
Okay, of course, I do agree also that base state aid per pupil needs to be brought up at least to the statutory funding level. Let me tell you a little background why. In 1984, my daughter and I did the bike across Kansas, and you may know this is a 7-day, 6-night adventure starting at the Colorado border near Greeley we did, and we finished at the Missouri border near Pittsburgh. And we biked the back roads of Kansas from small town to small town, and we spent the night in the local high school gymnasium with our bedroll on the floor there. And anyway, my takeaway from that was all across the state, Kansans value and take great pride in their public schools. And what I do know now that I didn't know then is that it is a constitutional responsibility. I mean, it is in our Constitution that we will adequately fund public schools. And I think this is, as it should be, that the state will provide a suitable education for all the children of Kansas. And if Governor Brownback is concerned about depopulation of western Kansas, the surest way to do that is to defund our schools as is now being done.
Okay,